David Levine. I'm co-chairman of Science Writers in New York. My other co-chair, Joe Bonner, is working on this, put it on YouTube. My guest tonight is Katherine Eban, who's an investigative journalist, a Vanity Fair contributing editor, and Andrew Carnegie fellow. This is my second time interviewing Katherine. The last time was for her book, Bottle of Lies, which was about the generic drug industry, and won lots of awards and attention. And she's also written on counterfeiting, gun trafficking, and coercive interrogations by the CIA. She also writes for the New York Times, South the Nation, New York Observer, and her work has been featured on 60 Minutes, Nightline, and NPR. And she lectures frequently on the topic of pharmaceutical integrity. So Katherine, you want to turn your camera on and join us? And your mic? Okay,
yeah.
Great. Okay,
Hi.
so thank you. So tell us about the article you wrote and why you wrote it.
Yeah, I mean, this was a big look back at the FDA's sort of no good, terrible, very bad year that it had during the COVID pandemic. And I really wanted to examine sort of what happened to the agency, how it got caught in the crosshairs of politics, and what the impact on the pandemic was. So the article for Vanity Fair was, my deep dive effort to do that. I got internal documents from inside the agency, and that enabled me to really look kind of comprehensively at its conduct over the last year.
So were these internal documents given to you voluntarily?
It's a multi-sourced story, and so I obtained the documents, but not through FOIA.
Okay. And that's the Freedom of Information Act.
Right, freedom of, yeah. I have found that reporting on this pandemic, FOIA just moves too slowly for trying to stay abreast of what's going on.
Okay. So before we talked a few minutes before, and so December 17th, 2019, the first cases of COVID-19 were detected in Wuhan, China. And then Stephen Hahn took his post as the commissioner of the FDA. But he said he had a lack of experience. The nickname Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Now, he wasn't a bad guy. He just wasn't experienced, I guess. Political.
So he spoke to me for this article, and he essentially copped to his own naivete. One of the things that he said to me is that coming from academic medicine, he was just not used to the kinds of lies that he was exposed to in Washington, DC. He just wasn't used to it at all. So I think he acknowledges that he was caught flat-footed by what was going on.
Okay. But I think a lot of people were caught flat-footed by the Trump administration. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't easy. So why don't we talk about, let's sort of tell the story of hydrochloroquine. And
yeah.
How that became the wonder drug for a while.
Yeah. So, this was sort of the case study of what happens when pharmaceutical regulatory decisions are not driven by science. Basically, the article opens with my documenting meetings that were taking place inside the White House, where there was a tremendous amount of pressure placed on Hahn to green light the wide use of hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID-19. And, as we know now, there was really a paucity of data to support that. But what happened was that Hahn essentially opened a side door to the agency by agreeing to the Trump White House plan to more widely distribute this drug. But that was just the beginning. And what I was able to document is that once he agreed to that, all bets were off. I think I have a source in there who's quoted as saying that he became, the Trump administration's delivery boy.
And who was behind who was pushing for the drug?
This drug was really dropped into the ear of Trump by a lot of very sort of high-level people that he hung out with, Larry Ellison and others, because they'd, seen some stuff on the internet, basically. And it was on the basis of that Oracle was going to design a database that was going to allow doctors to order hydroxychloroquine for anybody they saw and have those drugs, directly prescribed to those patients. And that plan set off alarm bells at the FDA I got an internal email in which Janet Woodcock reminded her colleagues, hey, we prosecute people for this, which is off-label use of drugs for purposes other than they are intended for.
So, it's just for the audience, it was a legal drug.
Sure. It was legally, it was prescribed for arthritis and for malaria use, but the plan that the White House was pushing would have essentially promoted the drug for purposes other than what it had been approved for, which was COVID-19.
But it didn't stop there. You talk about Marla Maples, one ex-wife of President Trump, pushing an 8-minute antibody test on behalf of a North Carolina doctor. Ivanka Trump, who wanted to get ventilators approved for adults as soon as possible, but needed the FDA expedited assistance. Former Republican Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, had some projects. The current House Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, also had friends who were pushing projects. So these are just deals that people wanted to get done for money.
Right. Well, what was really remarkable to me was that what I uncovered was that an email address was set up at the White House, which was for VIP requests for products that were being pushed by prominent people. So, hey, did you have a great ventilator you wanted to get approved? Did you have a, COVID saliva test that you wanted to have quickly reviewed? You could direct it to the White House. It would get put into this email and basically got unleashed. All these tsunami of randoms, which is where the article takes its headline, got unleashed onto the, reviewers at the FDA. So there was, in some cases, expedited review of tests and products that were being pushed by VIPs. Yeah.
And there was also other things, monoclonal antibodies, there was the plasma, all these things. So when did the pushback started coming from the scientific community and the FDA?
So, really the narrative is that this was an agency under siege with political types, including Adam Bowler, who was Jared Kushner's college roommate and pandemic sidekick, who were calling up reviewers, who were circumventing, the normal channels in the FDA and literally calling reviewers and asking, is it soup yet? Has something been approved? Has it been reviewed? And essentially Hahn allowed that. He had opened the door to it in some ways, but then what happened is a convalescent plasma press conference in which Hahn stood at the podium with the president, major number one mistake, to speak alongside the president for a review of a specific product, right? And he touted convalescent plasma as a kind of miracle cure. And what he said was inaccurate on many levels. And basically the scientific world went absolutely, excuse my French, apeshit. They just went nuts. You know, they were basically saw the head of the FDA pushing junk science to the American public, just, you know, totally overstating the benefits of this convalescent plasma for the treatment of COVID-19. He was under such intense pressure from the scientific community that he had to back down and apologize. And basically the message that he got loud and clear is that if he didn't change his ways, he was going to sort of lose the agency. He was going to lose the respect of the division directors. And, you know, his reputation was completely on the line. So as one of my sources said, it was a do or die moment for Steve Hahn.
So for the audience listening, if you have a question, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. Please put their questions in there, and when I see them lit up, I will read your questions. So why don't we talk about, so, you know, I once saw a government chart, and the FDA is like way down here, way down. There's so much power, but it's way down. And so the FDA commissioner reports to Commissioner Azar then.
Right, the Secretary of HHS, correct, yeah.
Okay, so the Health and Human Services, so what was their role in this? Because he was always at the press conferences, along with Dr. Burke and along with Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, so, you know, through my reporting over the year, what has really struck me is that Azar played a very important, but in some ways very negative role, because he was constantly ready to push his agency heads under the bus. I mean, there was so much criticism of the agencies operating underneath him, whether it was, you know, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, or FDA or CDC, but all of those agencies report to him. So his job, right, is to make sure that those agencies are all on task. But, you know, a lot of people that I've interviewed said that he was sort of continually undermining the agencies under his direct control. And so in this case, Steve Hahn at FDA is no different, where, you know, he was sort of closely controlling his conduct. One of the emails that I turned up was how the FDA, Hahn's chief of staff, who, you know, some people described her as a spy who was put there by Azar, and she basically stopped Hahn early on from reaching out to the heads of private companies to talk about the need to submit diagnostic testing applications to the FDA. So the question is, you know, did Azar slow down the pandemic response by blocking Hahn from taking action? You know, and that happened at the same time that the CDC was bungling its own rollout of its own tests. And all of that.
That had nothing to do with the FDA and nothing to do with Trump, really.
No, not necessarily. I mean, that was just a big fail, a big error at the beginning of this pandemic. Yeah.
Okay. So it's, you know, so we could talk about the family members. I know the family members are involved, but so, you know, at the press conference, I saw Dr. Birx, I saw Dr. Fauci, but there was also a general who was involved, who I thought he was pretty good. I mean, he seemed to just say, you know, we're gonna, you know, we got this. When the vaccines are ready, we're gonna roll them out. They're gonna be in your arms. Everyone's gonna be vaccinated. It sounded like everyone's gonna be vaccinated in a month, which obviously didn't happen. but Operation Warp Speed vaccines were produced. So what was the FDA's role in that?
Well, I mean, the FDA played an absolutely critical role in that, which was to review the data submitted by the vaccine manufacturing companies. So, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, to review that data and to, consider safety and efficacy and then grant authorization or approval if it merited it. So, that was absolutely critical. But one of the things that surprised me in my reporting is that a number of sources felt the FDA had gotten so snarled up in politics, and Hahn had been so hammered by the scientific community that he actually, their point is, he may have slow walked approval of a vaccine in order to sort of get free of the accusation that he was putting politics in front of science.
Well, the vaccines, I saw Francis Collins on. He said, I never dreamed, he said he and Dr. Fauci would talk often. He said, we never dreamed there'd be a vaccine this quickly.
Yeah.
And also as effective. He said, we were happy with 50% efficacy.
Yeah.
So I do have some questions. I'm going to read the submitted questions first. What is it about the scientific mind that is thrown to and persists in searching for linear boundaries when evidence from these searches increasingly point toward boundaryless networks of nonlinear reality? I'm not sure I totally understand that method question. All right, let me read the next one. What can should be done going forward to ensure that the FDA and other agencies remain independent of and impervious to the destructive actions of a future president?
That's really, I think that's
the heart of the question.
That's the heart of the matter. As one of my sources said to me, the head of the FDA should be like the head of the CIA. They should stay in the shadows. So, first and foremost, you should never have a commissioner standing up there with a president or, a political figure discussing, the breakthrough of a particular product that you are responsible for authorizing, right? Because that sends the message that you are more responsive to politics than the duties of your agency. So I think, that is number one. But I think primarily, the way the FDA was described to me is the FDA should only have one door. It's a front door, and everybody's got to go in it and stand on line the same way. And the problem during this pandemic is that it had, there were these VIP requesters breaking down the back door, coming in through the windows. You have to close all those entryways and just have a standard review process for absolutely everyone. So, I think that a strong leader of the FDA would be able to do that.
Well, I remember David Kessler is someone I know, and he was an FDA, and he made headlines by pulling orange juice, Minute Maid orange juice off the shelves because he said it was real orange juice. He says, no, it's concentrated. He just wanted to show that the FDA could do that.
Right.
But but he also made headlines, with the AIDS drugs. I went to some of the hearings. If you ever go to an FDA hearing, the people there are basically not scientists, but they're stock analysts, and they're calling to see what's they're leaning this way, leaning that way.
Right.
And Kessler got involved in it, saying that no, he doesn't want provisional approval, or he wanted full approval because he wanted people to be able to get reimbursed for insurance. To me, that seemed like that was an okay way to do it. He wasn't commenting on the drug. He was just saying, if we're going to approve it, let's approve it fully.
I mean, the FDA has incredible authority, right? I mean, the power lies in what they can approve and authorize or reject.
Right.
But I think one of the real troubles during this response has been these emergency use authorizations.
Right.
They've been very problematic. So the EUAs has really taken sort of FDA science down a rabbit hole, because the standard for authorization under an emergency use authorization for approval or authorization is a lot lower. The standard is that something may be effective, as opposed to demonstrated efficacy. And therefore, the FDA has approved stuff that actually shouldn't have been approved for COVID use, like hydroxychloroquine. Got in front of the science, got in front of the data, leaned out way too far over their skis, were taking pressure from the White House, gave an EUA, and in fact, not only was it not effective, but it was potentially dangerous.
Okay. Well, I want to point out that none of the vaccines are FDA approved. They're all approved for emergency use.
Correct. That's right.
None of the tests. I mean, I got a PCR test and it said on there, this test is not approved by the FDA, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. It was like a
Right.
10-page thing.
Right.
So there's no FDA approved treatment for COVID-19.
Right.
But everybody wants the vaccine. I mean, I'm very happy to have gotten it. So I'm going to start reading questions. The way you describe it makes it sound like hydrochloroquine could have been any drug. This then begs the question, if the government can redirect massive quantities of medication to the extent that those that need it daily cannot access it, should this not be a warning to us all?
The part of the question, if you could just read back about how, yeah.
And you can read them in the Q&A box too.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe that would be easier.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so.
Yeah, that is a big issue, right? And that in fact is exactly what happened with hydroxychloroquine, which is as soon as Trump got up at the podium and called it a potential game changer, and the FDA authorized it, it was actually in short supply all over the world. And then the FDA began approving supplies of it from manufacturing plants that had never been inspected by the FDA before, like one in Pakistan. This was a plant in Pakistan owned by Bayer, which was so dubious that it got in trouble with Pakistani regulators. No FDA inspector ever set foot in there, and yet they were approving chloroquine supplies from that plant because of this EUA. So it did have huge knock-on effects. Yeah.
And I think also there were people who were using it for legitimate purposes and they couldn't get it.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that is a very, very critically important drug for a number of conditions. I think like osteoarthritis and other conditions where suddenly, and I think lupus.
Lupus patients couldn't get it.
Yeah, could not get it. It's a critical drug for them.
Okay. So someone asked, is the federal government overstating the deaths caused by COVID and the efficacy of the vaccines? I mean, I don't think that's your field of expertise, and I kind of trust our government's numbers. They seem to have been honest.
I mean, I would just chime in to say that if anything, I do think that the number of deaths caused by COVID are, most experts I talk to feel that they are undercounted, and I would tend to agree with that.
I mean, I get emails from different cousins, family members saying, saying that that there are people are having miscarriages after the vaccines, and I just said, well, people have miscarriages after, going to Carvel, but they don't attribute it to Carvel. So, so here, how much was your confidence the FDA rattled by reporting? Are you confident things will be okay under the Biden administration?
Well, I mean, let me just say this: I'm never confident. And I've spent decades reporting on the FDA, and my book Bottle of Lies is all about some of the terrible lapses that occurred even under the Obama administration, when the FDA was, by most accounts, pretty reasonably competently run. So I think that there's, FDA is an agency that is under tremendous political pressure all the time. They have to show numbers to Congress to show they're approving drugs quickly, and there is a lot of perils from their being responsive or over responsive to industry. So no, I'm not confident at all.
And they can scare the hell out of. They're one of the few people who can really scare the hell out of a pharmaceutical company.
Yes, they can, and they should.
Yeah.
Because only frightened pharmaceutical companies tend to behave themselves, is my reporting experience.
How does the FDA determine when a trial has gathered enough data to be evaluated with respect to both numbers of subjects and duration? It seems that clinical trials become shorter and shorter over the years, and with emergency approvals, shorter still. How can long-term safety be evaluated under these conditions?
So that's a great question. And that was really one of the questions at the heart of the vaccine approvals. And in fact, one of the absolutely major battles that occurred with the vaccine approvals was that the FDA insisted on adding a 2-month requirement to the clinical trials by saying you have to monitor the condition of your clinical trial subjects for 2 months after their last shot. And basically that 2-month timetable was going to push vaccine approval past the November 3rd presidential election. And so that turned into, a giant hot potato. But there is no question that, clinical trials have been massively accelerated during this crisis. I think, one thing that the scientific community has really tried to do is try to kind of restructure how clinical trials are done so that they can be stood up quickly, with a sort of body of subjects who are, willing to participate quickly.
So now, so someone asked the question, now that these vaccines are approved, for emergency use, is that going to throw a wrench in the process for full approval of these vaccines? And I want to add a second thing to that. So first we're asking about, because in the meantime, they are completing their clinical trials, but we don't know how long that will be. The second thing is that now Moderna and Pfizer, and I was on a call with, and they announced that they're going to make a vaccine for the variants. And I'm not quite sure, they're also going to have a booster shot.
Right.
And I don't know what that booster shot is, but they weren't clear. I said, is a booster shot for the variants or is it for just in general? And they said, we don't know yet.
Right.
So they were pretty honest. But,
right.
So, I mean, I don't think that the EUAs are interfering with the full approval and the scrutiny of the drugs, but but that's the question for you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have a great answer for that. I know that, during the clinical trials, the big concern was if they did a kind of phased authorization, if they started doing a kind of early authorization, like, okay, we've now seen that we're going to say that they're sufficiently safe and effective for elderly nursing home residents. So we'll let them start taking it, that people would start peeling off of these clinical trials and you wouldn't get to completion there. So I don't know exactly what the ultimate impact is going to be on getting to a full approval. That's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer to that.
Okay, so someone wrote, I loved your Vanity Fair piece. We can stop there, right?
Thank you.
I think your work is I think it's a must read. But I wonder if your argument is essentially that the FDA should be so insulated that it won't be able to take even appropriate account of societal expectations. Should FDA not have accelerated approval of drugs intended to treat HIV, AIDS, or cancer during Dr. Kessler's tenure? And would you support public funding of life sciences research?
What excellent questions. I think I would support public funding of life sciences research. I think that's great. And I think along with public funding should come more transparency, because a lot of very critical information is considered proprietary and never reaches the public.
So what is public funding?
Well, that's a good question, how you would structure it, I mean.
Because I know people are critical of the venture capitalist funding of, drugs that people are interested in also.
Right. I mean, well, this is now an issue that is seriously playing out with vaccine distribution because, who owns these? Well, there's all this warp speed money, some of which apparently we just learned was siphoned off from hospital funding. Who owns these drugs? Does the U.S. government own them? Do the companies own them? Are we going to make the recipes available to other countries and other companies? How are they going to be shared with the rest of the world? I mean, these are massive questions. And
but it goes back to like the AZT was funded, came about with government money, but I think it was Burroughs Wellcome made a lot of money manufacturing it. The so-called Pfizer vaccine was not developed; they're just marketing it. I mean, it was invented in Germany by a small biotech company. But then again, you need someone who can market a drug,
right.
knows how to do that. So let's answer that last question. Should the FDA not have accelerated approval of drugs intended to treat HIV and AIDS or cancer during Dr. Kessler's tenure, I guess, in the 90s? So
I don't know that I have an answer to that question, but I would say, can the FDA be too insulated? The FDA has got to be faithful to its mission, right? Which is to make sure that the products it approves are safe and effective for the public. So how can it do that? I mean, one of the things that I have found in my reporting is you have this disconnect between FDA investigators in the field who are really heroic and uncover all kinds of problems all the time. Similarly heroic reviewers who are just looking at the data, and then the sort of political folks at the top of FDA who often override the decisions of investigators and reviewers. So that to me is the problem, one of the major problems that is sort of chronic within the FDA, and that has to be guarded against.
How do you compare the integrity of the United States FDA with the integrity of similar agencies or other countries, such as in the European Union and even Russia? Even Russia, I don't know.
I don't know about Russia. Look, I mean, the FDA, for a long time has been considered the gold standard for regulation around the world. And I think that there is, the review of the data for these COVID vaccines, for example, has been pretty remarkable. I mean, they built in a lot of transparency that just has not existed elsewhere. I mean, you have COVID vaccines in China and India that have not had completed phase 3 clinical trials where the data has been made public. So basically, those regulators are essentially telling the public in those countries to just trust them, and I think you would see something similar in Russia. So I think that's problematic. But,
Vladimir Putin's, he gave it to his daughter. He said, "Trust me." I wouldn't give it to my daughter if I didn't think it was going to work. So,
right. So I think that the US FDA really has achieved something in how it's been transparent, relatively transparent, or is more transparent than most regulators around the world in the approval process for the COVID vaccine. But I do think it's been coasting on its reputation for a long time overall.
Okay, so the AstraZeneca drug is not approved for use here, but it is approved for use in England, where it was basically Cambridge, Oxford, and also been approved for use in Europe, even though Europeans are,
Right.
all my friends in Europe say there's no vaccine distribution. So remdesivir was being tested in combo with other antiviral therapeutics for COVID-19. So I haven't heard about this drug in a long time. What were the results of these trials?
Yeah, that I don't know. I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head. Sorry.
That was a drug that Trump was given, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. So what should so if you were advising, what should the Biden administration do to make sure that we don't ever experience the FDA as it was during President Trump?
Basically, they should appoint a very, pro-regulatory commissioner who believes in and understands the mission of the agency, who's really experienced, and then essentially leave that person alone to run the agency.
Okay. So should it be a scientist? Should it be a really good administrator? Who's the ideal person to run the FDA?
I mean, I think, ideally you would have both.
Okay.
You would have a scientist who has really strong administrative experience. I mean, the fact of the matter is you need somebody who understands Washington, D.C. To run the FDA, in my opinion. And that was one of the big problems with Steve Hahn. He was really a neophyte when it came to Washington.
So I mean, besides Kessler, I think Margaret Hamburg was an FDA commissioner.
Yep, Hamburg, Gottlieb, Joshua Sharfstein was up for FDA commissioner, but now it looks like he's out of the running. And it looks like Janet Woodcock is out of the running as well, but she's acting FDA commissioner right now.
Hamburg was the New York City health commissioner.
Yeah, I mean, she had real administrative
and she's
experience. Yeah, she was. Yeah.
And Scott Gottlieb he's on TV all the time. He's very polished. He's very knowledgeable, but he's on the board of Pfizer.
Yeah, no, I have this detail in my article about how he was so ready for a TV camera that he would come to work wearing transparent powder.
Okay. They said about one politician, he'd be there for the opening of an envelope.
Yeah.
So not to minimize the recent calamities, but hasn't the FDA always been under intense political pressure all the way back to Harvey Wiley and Teddy Roosevelt? I don't know who Harvey Wiley is.
Yes, I mean, the answer is yes, it has been under intense political pressure. And, for example, the famous example that I cite in my article was Francis Kelsey, the famous reviewer who refused to buckle to pressure and never approved the sleeping pill that what was it called? That gave children the flippers instead of arms. That she never approved that in the U.S.
That was
thalidomide. Thank you. So yeah. So you need an FDA that does not buckle to pressure. But yes, the pressure has long been there. As long as I've been reporting on the FDA, people have proposed that the agency be divided. And that you have, one agency to grant approvals and another agency to regulate the companies and to do enforcement and compliance. Because, people say it's sort of a conflict that, you've got the same agency that approved the drug now trying to, going into the manufacturing plants and doing enforcement. So, that kind of proposal just highlights the problems when it comes to, managing the FDA's conflicts, inherent conflicts.
So should the FDA be an independent agency like the FTC? That's a tough question. I think.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I mean,
No.
the thing that I hear people talk about all the time is that the FDA should be a cabinet level position, because it isn't. I mean, it's under HHS, and doesn't have enough authority, enough of its own authority. But I don't know about an independent agency.
Okay. You mentioned that Commissioner Hahn opened a side door to the FDA. So is this door able to be closed, and can the FDA regain its credibility? Have you seen the Biden administration take advantage of this side door access to the agency?
I think it's, first of all, too early to say how the Biden administration is going to interact with its own FDA, because we don't even have an FDA commissioner yet. And I think that will be a really critical signal of what the Biden administration intends to do with its FDA. But, that side door can definitely be closed. I mean, one of the critical mistakes that Hahn made is he was allowing political operatives and people at the White House to call division directors, to call reviewers, to make inquiries about whether drugs or therapeutics or vaccines were under review yet, or what the timetable was. He should have stopped that. He could have stopped that, and he didn't until a lot had gone wrong.
So I think also, is it harder in the internet age? I mean, you hear that, you hear that toilet paper is running out. Try get Pepsid, a few months ago, because Pepsid was said to be a cure for that, and you couldn't find it. It was gone from the stores.
Right.
Zinc is gone from the stores. I went to, someone said try zinc. I found one bottle of zinc tucked away somewhere. Vitamin D3, all these things. This has nothing to do with the FDA, but
Right.
there are all kinds of people writing all kinds of things, and
Right.
they're saying that you can boost your immune system with vitamin C, zinc, vitamin D3, and things like Pepsid will help you. And I was told before the vaccine, don't take Tylenol, don't take any Motrin or Advil, because that will interfere with your body's immune response. So I asked the head of, infectious diseases at Weill Cornell, is this true? Said, nobody knows. Somebody just speculated that as a question, and all of a sudden everyone's being advised. I mean, I know when I got a vaccine, the person told me, don't take any drug, even if you have 103 fever. I said, what?
This is like one of the stories that I relate in the article is about oleandrin. So. Right. Oleandrin is an extract of a poisonous shrub, and a company called Phoenix Biotechnology is trying to develop it as a COVID treatment. On their board of directors was this guy, Mike Lindell, who was the CEO of MyPillow.
Oh, yeah.
He was the one who was, going into the Oval Office to propose that, that Trump, to advocate to Trump that he impose martial law after the election. Anyway, he's a crazed, became a kind of crazed insurrectionist. But anyway, they had a meeting in the Oval Office in July where they met with Trump and sort of pitched oleandrin as a COVID treatment. Then the side door began, the back door, a lot of phone calls and a lot of pressure on the FDA to look at oleandrin as a possible COVID treatment. Well, I got inspection records which showed that not that long after this Oval Office meeting, an FDA investigator went down to this small company in Texas that was doing a clinical trial of oleandrin, which was a completely unauthorized science experiment where this Houston doctor was
Mhm.
giving this substance to workers at a meat packing plant and relatives of and residents in a nursing home. And basically, the FDA investigator found human subject violations in the use of oleandrin. And remarkably, the FDA came down really hard on the Houston doctor and on Phoenix Biotechnology. And that one felt to people like, okay, we dodged a bullet here, because, they were afraid that they were going to start, widespread oleandrin distribution to every living American. And that didn't happen. So in that case, the FDA worked as it should have.
Yeah, well, I think it's a kind of tragedy that the FDA has no real power to regulate supplements.
Mm-hmm.
That was because of Orrin Hatch,
Mm-hmm.
so, whose state made the most supplements in the world. But so, what do you think we should be discussing in the policy area about the source of information that should inform clinical decisions? Physicians cannot keep up with the literature and are not reimbursed for maintaining currency with emerging data. How can they get the data they need? How can you take the industry out of the equation? Should FDA or pastors be the only source of clinical guidance? Well, I don't think pastors are, I don't look to a pastor for clinical guidance, but I mean, I don't think, I don't look to the FDA for clinical guidance. I mean, we look to doctors we have and things like that. So I'm not sure I do understand this question.
I think the FDA is pretty pointed in saying that it's not making medical decisions.
Right.
The FDA does not make medical decisions. What it does is, set guidelines for what medications are used and how they're used, and sets, guidance for how the safe operations of manufacturing facilities that make those products, but not actual clinical guidance.
Okay, so we're coming towards a close. So I always want to ask the people, I always do ask the people I interview, what do you do? So you live in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
So have you done indoor dining?
No.
Okay. Have you, do you go to indoor gyms?
No.
Okay.
I haven't been to a gym
Okay.
since last March. Yeah.
I've been to museums. How about you?
Nope.
Okay.
So my mom is 88
Okay.
and she is not in great health, and we go see her once a week. And so we're really careful.
Okay.
We're really careful.
Okay. Has your mother been vaccinated?
She got her first shot. It was really hard to line it up. She got her first shot, and her second one is March 11th. So that I know off the top of my head.
So that will be good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe you could be a little more relaxed when you go visit her.
I hope so. I think, the variants are the wild card, right? We really don't think we know enough about how that's going to interact with vaccination. And then, of course, the wild card of dismayingly early reopenings that have just been announced.
Yeah, in Texas and South Carolina, they're totally open for business.
Yep. Which Biden referred to today as Neanderthal thinking.
Yes, it is. I have a nephew who says, come down to Florida. Said, we don't wear masks here. We go to restaurants here. And I said, I'm going to wait. Even vaccinated, I'm going to wait.
Yeah.
It is interesting that people's views say, well, I know people have gotten COVID and, they were sick for a while, but now they're fine. And I said, yes, but because you're speaking to people who survived the experience.
Mm-hmm.
There are 500,000 Americans who did not survive the experience.
Right.
And they would not say the same thing. So tell people, so since I first interviewed you last year with Bottle Lies, so I imagine you can get it now in paperback?
Yeah. Bottle of Lies is out in paperback,
Okay.
with a new author's note. So that's great. And then there's a lot of information on my website, which is katherineeban.com. I do see we have a couple more questions.
I'll read them. Okay.
Okay.
Do you have any recommendations for where consumers can get good, timely information that's understandable concerning the risks and benefits of the vaccines and any drugs for that matter?
Boy, that is just a great question. To be honest, I am like kind of hooked to some of the epidemiologists who are just on Twitter, who are just fantastic at laying stuff out. So I hang on their tweet threads, which is fantastic. I think it is sort of fair to assume, well, assume nothing, but the CDC's website, which has now been freed from this miasma of disinformation, is also a good place to go. So I think that that's, very, very good. And I think, we have some amazing science communicators in this country who really are on social media doing a great job of explaining stuff.
Well, I spoke with one of the epidemiologists, Dr. Sivak. She's in Scotland, and she's on Twitter a lot. I've spoken to journalists from the New York Times. Very good. So I'm going to just do one last question. Are negative results of clinical trials given enough publicity? Negative results are important too.
Absolutely. Negative results are vitally important, and they should be required to be published.
They're required to be posted on the drug companies' websites.
Yeah, that's critical information. Absolutely.
So in order for a drug to be approved, they have to have 2 positive trials, but they can have endless negative trials. So,
right.
So everyone always wonders, but so what do you say to people who say, I'm not so sure I want the vaccine, I want to wait and see? Because I had a friend today speak and said, I'm not sure, I want to see which one is better and which one. And I said, I would get the first one you could get. That's probably, that's my recommendation.
I mean, I have to say to the people who are saying I'm going to wait for a while, I think the variants really, to me, should change that calculation.
Yeah.
Given the dangers, given the infectiousness.
Because we New Yorkers have our own variant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the New York City / Washington Heights variant. And they're mad at Washington Heights. They're mad that called the New York City. So,
frightening.
Yes. They're going to have their own Twitter accounts, these variants. They're going to be famous. So tell us where we can get Bottle of Lies besides Amazon.
So I think, any online at any bookstore, and or order from your local bookstore. Some local bookstores do stock the paperback, but certainly, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of those booksellers will have it.
Okay.
And thank you, Eliza, for your comment about recommending Bottle of Lies. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a very good book. I read it because we talked about it. So next week, just plug what we're doing. On March 11th, Carl Zimmer has a new book out, and you can read an excerpts from the book in this weekend's New York Times. And then that's March 11th, and on March 18th, I'm interviewing Sherry Turkle, who wrote a book called the Empathy Diaries, I think. But she had a really great review yesterday in the New York Times, and they did a feature story just on her this weekend. So I hope you'll tune in for that. And in April, we're going to have part 2 with Helen Fisher of Dating in the Era of COVID. So, which was very popular last time, and we'll see what it's like a year later. So I want to thank Katherine for all her work. We'll look for your next article in the Vanity Fair. And,
Great to be back. Thank you.
thank you so much. And everyone stay safe. And if you can get a vaccine, just go for whatever you can get. Okay, take care.
Thanks. Bye.